Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the program today. I'm so happy to be joined by Dr. Clint Longenecker, an award-winning business educator, researcher, author, speaker, and executive coach who has been recognized by The Economist as one of the top 15 business professors in the world. He is now retired, though, but still very active in his coaching duties. He is a thought leader in rapid performance improvement and has published over 180 journal articles in America's top academic and professional journals, including the author of two of my favorite best-selling books, Getting Results, The 5 Absolutes to High Performance, and The 2-Minute Drill, Lessons for Rapid Organizational Improvement from America's Greatest Game. Welcome to the program again, Clint. Thank you for joining me.
Charles, thanks for the invite today. It's always a privilege to spend some time with the good IMS family members, and thank you for your leadership of this terrific organization.
I don't know if you realize this, Clint, but you were the first episode of my podcast several years ago. We're almost at 100. So, maybe we can make sure that this airs right around that time. But thank you again for joining us. And today we're going to talk about a different topic, which is so critical for every leader at every level, and that's ethical leadership. So, what I love about your research is you really drill down to the bottom line of effective leaders, that in the end, the bottom line is leaders are paid to deliver results, correct?
Well said. And it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in. I think at the end of the day, whether it's the military, whether it's manufacturing, service, banking, whatever, leaders are paid to deliver results. And a big chunk of what we do really needs to focus on that fact. What are we doing? Are we properly focused on the right results? And then are we engaging in the things, the activities that drive those results? And especially when you're a leader, making sure that we're doing the right things with our people to communicate, build vision, create teamwork, and all those other things that can easily be pushed aside when we get real busy. But we've got to engage in more value-added activities that drive business results. The more effective we are doing that, the better off we're going to be as a leader. But at the same time, there's a cautionary tale here that if we focus on results without the process necessary to get those results, we can become very, very ineffective at what we do. And maybe even a taskmaster for that, for lack of a better term, if you would. So I think that the bottom line is that leaders are paid on the bottom line. And I would just say that at the end of the day, there's a whole lot to getting there. And that's one of the key factors we're going to talk about today.
Well, and I love how you also mentioned that a lot of people talk about what it means to deliver results, how to get those results, how to be successful in your role, but not too many people identify the reasons why leaders don't deliver results and focus on the failures so that people can be more aware of common tripping stones that occur in the path of any leader as they're trying to deliver results. And you list a lot of different causes why leaders don't get results. Perhaps you can give us maybe one or two of those, but I really, as you know, want to focus on one of those for the remainder of our time. But is there one that's more common than others in today's society?
Well, the number in our research, we've done multiple studies on this, and the number one factor for ineffective leadership not delivering results is an inability to effectively communicate with people, followed by the issue of a lack of emotional intelligence. So not knowing how to build a team, connect with people one-on-one, having great interpersonal relationships. And the thing I love about the term emotional intelligence for our listeners, Google it. Lots of things will pop up in your search, if you would. But what you'll find very quickly, it's all about being aware of how we're interacting with other people, being sensitive and empathetic towards others, being self-monitoring so that we adjust our approach to leadership, are in communication to the individual people that we're trying to serve and trying to lead. So those are really important things. And the third part of this is a lack of trustworthiness. So I was referring to a study that we did a few years ago about bad bosses. The number two factor for being a bad boss is that you or I, if we're in a position where we are acting in an untrustworthy way, we cannot have a great effect on people. We cannot be a good leader. So a lack of trustworthiness is really, truly important. Do the people that report to you trust you? And that trustworthiness is driven by the fact that it's competency-based, it's character-based, and it's courage-based. So it takes competency, it takes character, and it takes courage to do the necessary things to be a great leader in the 21st century. And a big part of that trustworthiness is your character.
You're absolutely right. I think when you get to a certain level in leadership, you wouldn't have gotten there if you didn't have the technical expertise, the competencies covered. So you're above that threshold there. There might be some cases where that's not the case, but what a lot of leaders don't prepare themselves enough for or don't even realize it's going to be and have an impact on them is the character side and building personal integrity, character, and leading in an ethical manner.
Yes, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, the question is this: why would you want to follow somebody? And we are really excited to follow somebody who's interested in looking after us. So I have found in my research, my personal experiences, and my many leadership roles, people care how much you care about them before they care how much you know. And that's an old adage that it's kicked around a lot. But at the end of the day, it is ever so true. So if I demonstrate great and exceptional caring for the people that are under my tutelage, if you would, that can have a profound effect on this. But this trustworthiness thing is very easily violated. So among our listeners, who said this, I'll get back to you on something, but we don't follow up. We're eroding our trustworthiness when we make those kind of statements. Let's get together and have lunch sometime. That's like, well, if I don't write it down, if I don't follow up, I'm eroding my trustworthiness. So at the end of the day, there's little things that we can do to make sure that we're walking that line. There's huge things that we can do in ethical decision making or demonstrating appropriate behavior or role modeling. So in many cases, leaders are behaving unbecomingly, and yet they're telling their people to always do the right thing. So that level of duplicity, factored in here really sheds a lot of trustworthiness as well for folks.
You're right. The foundation is trust with any leader. To build that trust, you have to act in an ethical manner. If we're talking about ethical leadership, let's define ethics and what we really mean by that.
Well, ethics are, if you look at the textbook definition, it's a code of conduct, of morality, dealing with right and wrong. I mean, there's the simplest definition you could possibly put out there. So it goes by, it's an accepted standard of behavior, things that we consider to be right and wrong. We have lots of laws out there and lots of governance handbooks and things and codes of conduct and standards of behavior that have been written to basically tell people in our company, here's how we behave. This is what we do here. And so I think that that's one piece of it. The next part of it is our decision-making prowess. So when we make decisions, are we taking into account the moral standards and the responsibilities that we hold in making those decisions? So I think there's a lot of ground in here, a lot of developing your personal rubric for doing this, but there's some fundamentals that are really paramount to this. So when you're making a decision that you believe has ethical consequences or moral fallout, if you would, always slow down and take into account what the issues are. Secondly, seek wise counsel. So if you want to be a great decision maker, then engage the people around you that can help you make wise and ethical decisions. And we work in organizations that have these standards that are laid out for us when making decisions concerning maybe who we on the supply side or a customer side, what we can and cannot do. All right, so seek out counsel around those if you have a question mark on those things. In many cases, ethical decisions that we consider to be like something we're torn about, the decision's already been made for us. Go to your company's handbook, go to your union contract, look up the things that maybe are the background material or the context, and there's a very good chance the ethical decision making that you're struggling with, the decision may have already been made by your company because people had seen it enough. They've just programmed it into their handbook, if you would. But ultimately, and this is where it gets very interesting for lots of us, is that I believe that every position out there has with it temptations. So if ethics are the moral standard, the temptations are anything that would pull us away or draw us away from that ethical standard. And I'll make this statement again. Every position has temptations associated with it. And what we know to be true as we rise higher in an organization and you become more successful with your career, certain things can happen that can make us more vulnerable to falling prey to temptations that are out there. The higher you rise in an organization, the less direct supervision you have. The higher you rise in any organization, the greater control you have over resources, over people, over agendas. The higher you rise in any organization, the less personal relationships you might have that will hold you accountable to always doing the right thing. The higher you rise, it's easier for people to become socially isolated or to be unsure of why people want to be their friend. So I've had to see multiple CEOs say, I always am careful when somebody approaches me because I'm never sure what their motive is. So they allow themselves not to get real close to other people in some cases. And that's bad for helping us keep our feet firmly planted on the ground. And the last point I would make would be this: the higher you rise in any organization and the more success you have, it's easy to allow hubris or egocentrism to creep into our lives and take us to places that we shouldn't go. And so those are some drivers, if you would, of things that can cause us to become less than good at what we do and fall prey to temptations out there. And they can also help us to go to dark places.
Those are so good, those facts. You also list them in a summary list. So I'll just give our listeners that too, because these are every leader faces temptations. Fact two, the word temptation is generally ignored, veiled, or dismissed in leadership and ethics development training. So it's not talked about within organizations. Fact three, organizations are quick to tell their people what not to do, but they rarely give them the tools to conquer the temptations that come with the territory, right? Because every leader faces temptations. The other thing that you mentioned I thought was very insightful. The higher you rise in any organization, the greater your exposure to temptation and the greater the fall. And a leader's success, power, and position can actually set the table for ethical failure if they're not diligent about ways to prevent it. So that hubris that you mentioned is so critical because people feel that if they aren't going to have temptations or they can deal with them effectively, they're setting themselves up for a fall. They have to realize they're weak in certain areas. They have to plan for those areas. Like a saying that I always remembered, I'm not sure who said it to me. If you have a problem with drinking, don't go to a bar to eat pretzels, right? Stay away from those situations. But more importantly, have a plan of attack when you know that you're going to be confronted with certain temptations, especially those that you struggle with.
Absolutely. We go through an exercise with senior leaders and boards of directors and senior military leaders and members of the intelligence community, and we have them identify the temptations that come along with the territory that they operate in. We call it temptation mapping. To identify what's mapping, to identify the lay of the land, what's out there. So when you go through the temptation mapping process, if you ask a person, hey, what temptations do you face? They'll go, me? I don't really face any. We say, well, all right, let me rephrase the question. If somebody were to take over your job and you were going to coach them to help prepare them for some of the temptations that might come with the territory of operating in your job, what would that list look like? And people do it. They lean in, they go, oh my goodness, there's this, there's that, there's this. So they become very animated. So what we do is we set up a process where we have a group of leaders identify with no names attached the temptations that come along with the position that they hold. We then collect them up, shuffle them up, randomly pass them out, and we have everybody read at least 10, 5 or 10, or at least half the group to make sure that everybody sees what everybody else is writing. Then we send them to the board with a flip chart and we ask them this question: hey, what are the top 10 temptations you've read about from the members of our group here? Let's put them on the board in order of frequency or order of impact, if you would. So people go through 15, 20-minute discussion, they list them up, and it is fascinating because depending on the company, depending on the organization, the overlap is significant between all these groups. And just to have the conversation, hey, there is temptation to manipulate data in all of our jobs. And let's admit it, people will talk to each other like that. They'll say, hey, there's sexual temptations associated with operating in our workspace. There's no question about it. Let's put that out there. There is temptations for cheating on our expense accounts. There's a temptation that can become very real. People have this conversation. And by doing this, Sir Charles, it's very cool because what happens is you're basically seeing people agreeing. There's a little bit of nervous laughter, but what you're doing is you're level setting. You're getting people to think through the ethical standards that we need to address. And these are very personal kinds of wrongdoings, if you would. Use of company personnel or company resources for personal gain, manipulating HR practices so I can get my team in place. I mean, there's all these different things, and people rarely, if ever, talk about it unless we set the table to do so. That's part A. Part B, then you ask the question, okay, now to keep people from getting caught up in these things, what advice might you offer each other by way of building guardrails? And we've all seen guardrails along the road. We've all seen guardrails when we go down steps. There'll be places where there's handrails that we want to hang on to. What is the purpose of a guardrail? The purpose is very straightforward. It's to keep people from going over the edge. And the guardrail is always put up on this side of trouble. So we want to run up against the guardrail before trouble hits. So the best way to do this is to identify the temptations that I might face and then build out a guardrail. And some of them are exceptionally pragmatic and practical. Example could be this: I never make serious decisions when I'm tired or in a bad mood. All right, that's a great guardrail. If you're involving a decision regarding money or personnel, don't do it if you know you're vulnerable to fatigue or having a bad attitude about something. That's a guardrail, a behavioral guardrail that you should bake in. I've had people say, I never handle petty cash alone. I always make sure somebody's with me when I do that. When I go to a company meeting, drinking might be prevalent, but I will never allow myself to have more than one glass of wine or one beer or whatever, or not at all. Because they know I had an executive MBA student lose his job because he went to the Christmas party and got sloshed and spoke poorly of the CEO of the company in front of a group of peers. And it's like, wait a minute here. Could this have been prevented? Yes, it could have been prevented had he had a guardrail in place. So at the end of the day, the purpose of a guardrail is to bake out things that you know are really important to keep you on the straight and narrow. Hey, take your organization's standard of behavior or code of conduct and personalize it. Bake it down into something that is directly applicable to the temptations you face. Develop a personal mantra. And we know a mantra is a single line, if you would, a word that will keep you out of trouble. Like one of my mantras last Friday night should have been, never shave in a hurry. So that's one of my mantras. And I violated my own mantra, shaving in a hurry. And I thought to myself, why don't I just try to cut my chin off completely? So that's it. I told people it was a dueling scar, but no, it's shaving too quickly. But the purpose of a mantra. So my mantra is, I will always do the right thing for my family, my employer, my faith. Those things in that order, not complicated. Always do the right thing. So we use that mantra accordingly. Always, always, always have an accountability partner. So who in your life is holding you accountable? By the way, the higher you rise, the less accountability a person has. So what are you going to do?
Something else, Clint. I mean, the higher you rise in an organization, the harder it is to find that person that's going to hold you accountable that you can be transparent with. So what are some tips that you can give for those senior leaders listening that say, yeah, that's all great and I know I need one, but it's just really difficult to find and I don't trust anyone in my organization. I don't want to appear incompetent, disclose things that I wish I, shouldn't have disclosed to them. Any suggestions regarding, the more senior leaders?
Absolutely. Trade associations are a very good place to find peers in other organizations. Find a peer in a organization not operating in your exact same space or marketplace, but pick out somebody that's a person you look up to, you respect. Maybe you can connect with them through a chamber of commerce, or maybe through another board that person is sitting on. And I would go back a lot. I have friends that find great accountability partners at church. So there's all kinds of places that we can find people and then set up some guidelines for your discussions. Get to know each other as friends. But I think it's some really important questions to ask. What do I need to keep doing? What do I need to start doing? What do I need to stop doing? And if somebody asks you those questions every couple of weeks and you're sitting down over a meal or a Zoom meeting and have those conversations and they're heartfelt, it can be a tremendous source of, I think, solace on the one hand, advice on the other hand, and accountability. Those are all really, really important things for all people in serious senior leadership positions, if you would. So, but the list of guardrails goes on. It could go on to lots of different things: personal code of conduct, accountability, taking time for self reflection, double loop thinking, if you would. So, if I do this, and the answer is I probably shouldn't do it. Well, I think it again, I probably shouldn't do it. Then you know your answer. But taking the time, people make bad decisions when they're in a hurry.
Well, everyone's in a hurry these days, right, Clint? I mean, wouldn't you agree that personal reflection is a little to no time in anyone's day anymore? They're in execute only mode. There's so much to do. There's not enough time in the day to do it all. How do you set some time aside, or should you prioritize the time aside for that personal reflection and to build your self-awareness muscle?
Yeah, I would just say this. We have a process that we have developed years ago called STOP, and it's an acronym. It stands for sit, think, optimize, and the P part of it is squared, so it's P squared, and that means purposeful performance. So if you've clarified your mission, you've clarified the activities you need to engage in that are really important. If you clarify the relationships that are going to drive those relationships and that those results, then you really have to get down to the single issue of time, the application of our time resource. And part of that has to be reflection. Thoreau said the unexamined life is not worth living. And there's real truth to that. Taking time to think. There's a terrific book out there entitled The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, written by a young pastor by the name of Colmer is the last name. I think it's got great faith-based advice for us about the essence of slowing down. And in our research, this is really interesting. If you find somebody who is too busy, they do not engage in all the important things that take time. So think about it. Relationships take time. Solving big problems, it takes time. Building a customer base and a customer, it takes time. And yet, the faster we move through life, we don't take the time to do the things that are truly, truly important. And I would go back and just say, I think one of the greatest things you can do as a leader is to become more intentional in your behavior. Define that mission. Define the most important people in your life you need to invest in. Identify the activities. Before Charles and I had our discussion, I was in a discussion with one of my former executive MBA students. And the comment was, I'm so busy, I don't have time to do certain things. Like what? Like, well, build my team, like train my people, do all these things. So he's so busy, he can't do the very things that will cause him to be successful. So I would dare say that that's a paradox, if you would. So really something for all of us to think about.
Well, and I love your question that you always ask is, busyness should not be worn as a badge of honor. It's really a mark of servitude. And busy doing what should be the question that you ask yourself, not just for the sake of being busy. Because you're right, you have to hit those most important things every day. That's going to make you an effective leader and deliver those results, not completing everything on your to do list.
Absolutely. And one last thing, when people get engaged in unethical activity at work, it is a distraction. It's always hanging over their head and it holds people back from becoming the best version of themselves, which is a very popular thing to say these days. People say, I want to be the best version of me. Or I've also heard, I want to be my authentic self. I need to be more of my authentic self. Well, here's a footnote. If you are self centered or arrogant or not mindful of other people or always in chaos, you don't want to be more of yourself. You don't want to be your authentic self. You want to be a new person. And without that reflection, we really don't know how to move forward with becoming that better person. Does that make sense?
That makes a whole lot of sense. I've heard people say, well, when they say something rude or inconsiderate to someone, well, I'm just being honest. I'm just being myself. Well, no, you're not being yourself. You need to be tactful as well. And you're actually being rude in this case. So, yeah, you don't want to amplify those qualities of yourself that are not going to make you an effective leader or a good human overall. And you mentioned something else too within your work is that practice servant leadership. And I know servant leadership's kind of trite now. It's not necessarily the buzzword anymore, but it's a lot of great practical applications come from it, especially to maintain humility, which I think is so critical to any leader as they move up the ranks. Because what you just said, they're going to be more arrogant. They're going to think they have all the answers. And as you move up through the ranks, someone told me once, which I thought was really insightful, is that as you move up, it's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and building people up around you. That's what leadership is. And maybe you can speak a little bit to how a leader can stay more humble and more grounded as they move up and encounter more success.
Right. That's a great point. I want to add just to what you said too, though. I'm just being, people say, I'm just being honest. Well, you know what? Truth without love is brutality. It can quickly become brutality. So if we have love without truth, it's hypocrisy. So I think at the end of the day, this kind of goes back to if you're a person who really wants to be successful, all good leadership is servant leadership. All good you say, what about strategic leadership? Is serving the overarching needs of the company. And it's not about me as the leader, it's about the company. All good leadership is servant leadership. The best leader that any of us has ever worked for, she or he might not have been the brightest, they might not have been the most talented, but they cared about people and we worked with and through them to make them great because they cared about us. And I really believe that that is such a powerful thing. How do leaders stay humble? I'll tell you what, build your marriages, invest and have a great marriage. Great marriages can cause people to stay humble. Keep the channels of communication open with your spouses. That's an awesome thing. Cindy and I have been married for 35 years. I am very blessed to be married to a woman of this caliber. And I would like to think she might think the same, although days, maybe I'm not so sure about that. But I would go back. Great marriages are a powerful tool. I would add to that, go into your communities and invest time. And don't just sit on boards, which is a great thing, an important thing to do. Go down to the soup kitchen or work at a homeless shelter or go out and engage in some community service where you're doing physical labor and be reminded of how important it is to look after all workers. All jobs are important. There's a gazillion different things that we might be able to do, but at the end of the day, I think realizing that as a leader, the higher you rise, the more important it is for you to keep your heart and your mind in the right place. There is no substitute for awesome servant leadership in any organization. And again, if you are untrustworthy, it's hard to be a servant leader, isn't it?
You're right. You're right. I would add to that is seeking out the input from experts and identifying the right role models that you look up to, right? That really can help you move through that process and keep you grounded in reality because there's certain people in your life that if you have the right individuals, they have a very effective way of keeping you grounded based on what they know and things that they can do to help you stay the course and be ethical in all that you do because no one should be an island. Everyone needs a community of support. You need people in your life, your mentors, people that are above you that have the experience, the expertise, and act in an ethical manner to keep you on that straight and narrow because the Beth Sheba syndrome is real. Even if you don't have any faith, it's a great story, a biblical story showing you that anyone, in this case, the leader of Israel, King David, could be tempted by something that caused catastrophic consequences.
For not only him, but for his family and for the country. Yeah. And I would go back, see, if you ask a group of leaders, what's the number one factor to stay on the straight and narrow and building your guardrails? Whether it's the military, the intelligence community, or corporate America, or an entrepreneur, people always say this number one answer is going to be, you got to have accountability. You need an accountability partner. You need a personal board of directors. And this is all tied together. But how do you stay humble? Have a personal board of directors. How do you stay focused? Have a personal board of directors. And we could go through all these things are at some level connected. So I would go back and just say, hey, let's think about doing a couple things. What's your personal code of conduct? What are the things you truly value? Let's write them out. Now, the next question is, who's going to hold you accountable for that list of things you want to do? And who's going to hold you accountable for your development outside of your boss? You need an accountability partner so that she or he can help me get better at what I do. And those three questions are really important to the discussion. As a leader, the last 2 weeks, you're going to ask me this question. Clint, what do you need to keep doing that's really working you feel good about? Clint, what do you need to start doing that you weren't doing that you should have been doing? And Clint, what do you need to stop doing that was knuckleheaded, stupid, or just plain didn't make good sense or was non-value added? Thinking through those questions with somebody on a regular basis is paramount to your development if you're going to be the best version of yourself. And I get excited about these conversations. You know why? Because we are all whips. We are all works in progress. And I've yet to meet the leader. I think I've only met one that said, I'm as good as I'm ever going to get. This is it right here. I got it figured out. I have not. I've met one of those, and it didn't turn out so well for him. Some things that he got caught up in. I would go back and say, we're all works in progress. And what a responsibility and what a great calling that we're in a position to help each other out. I think that that's good and noble work.
Great insight there. And you were right. Be humble lest you stumble. When you think you have it all figured out, usually you're setting yourself up for a fall. So always be mindful of your weaknesses and always be grounded in the fact that you can always improve, always get better. Thank you for a great conversation today, Clint. Any last minute tip that you'd like to leave our listeners with as they get started on this process? We mentioned a lot of tools, the personal code of conduct, accountability partners. Is there one thing that would be the first step that they could take right now, today, to be more ethical in their leadership?
Absolutely. I would just say this. I would encourage you today and for the next 5 days to stop, sit, think about how you can optimize the influence you have at work and then perform at a purposeful level. Note, what's the opposite of purpose? The opposite of purposefulness is randomness. And randomness is the absolute arch enemy to excellence. Find somebody who's really struggling and in a hurry and trying to get this done and that done. There's a very good chance, and our research will back this up, they are behaving in a random fashion, crisis driven fashion. That is the arch enemy of having an excellent career, an excellent home life, an excellent personal life. So our goal ought to be to remove randomness from our life. It starts with reflection. It really does. Taking the time to think. And by the way, you are good at this already because when we take vacations, you are very purposeful the 3 or 4 days before you leave on vacation to get things done appropriately so you can leave without the proverbial sword of Damocles dangling over your head in a thread while you're on vacation. So take that skill you already possess and learn how to apply it to yourself daily.
Wonderful. Thank you for all this insight. Thank you for those tools that you shared. Remind our listeners how they can get a hold of you.
Clint Longenecker, if you Google my name, I'm easy to find.
Wonderful. Thank you, Clint, for a great conversation today. And thank all of you for joining us.
And everybody, thank you for investing in yourself. And Charles, as always, thank you for your leadership. You influence a lot of us out there, myself included, in lots of good and powerful ways. Keep up the good work and know that we appreciate what you're doing and how you're doing it. God bless you, my friend.
If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share with others and post about it on social media. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which has video recordings of all the episodes of this podcast, along with bite-sized segments called single servings that are designed to answer your most pressing leadership and management questions. Remember, until next time, it's not what you know that counts, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.